this change, perhaps Professor Dawkins suggested, due to criteria which are liberal and humanist? Well, he thinks they are, and I agree, they are. The criteria that we now use to think about what it is right to do are liberal and humanist. Indeed. Liberalism and humanism are about human freedom, human dignity, and human value. They're about human flourishing, the flourishing of human life. And I broaden this out and say the flourishing of all sentient life. But is that a non-religious criterion? Has it resulted from violent attacks on religion? Not at all. The Enlightenment, which I celebrate, is the child of religious reform. I would only be sad about the fact that the Enlightenment went too far, sometimes in rejecting any sort of God, as well as rejecting the primitive and unacceptable idea of God. So the question, it seems to me, is what sort of idea of God are you going to have, rather than saying, oh, well, God has to be the most primitive thing you can think of, and we don't want to have that. So it is a sensible question to ask, what sort of God is there? But of course, the biblical view has always, however primitive the beliefs were, however primitive the culture was from our point of view, has always held the view that there is a creator of this universe who creates for good and who is himself good. The process of religious reflection has consisted in thinking out progressively and in changing ways what this goodness consists in. It's been a series of progressive disclosures of the nature of God. It hasn't been a giving up of God, it's been an exploration of what it is that God has to be like if God is a good creator of a good universe. Now this is going to turn out to be very relevant, in fact, to the question of morality, but not in the way that has been suggested so far. It's been suggested perhaps so far that if God is relevant to morality, or if religion is relevant, all you do is open a book, the Bible, read a sentence and say, now I know what to do, I don't have to think about that, I just accept it. Well, that's nonsense. I don't know anybody who's ever conducted their lives in that way. Pick and choose, yes. But how do you pick and choose? The criteria are internal to the text. But not just confined to the text, they're internal to the communities which have used, reflected upon the text. And of course, the reason why synagogues and churches don't now say that God really does want you to give your daughter to the first people who knock on the door is that there have been centuries of reflection on this which say that there are different views which are slightly more advanced. And we don't think that that's the sort of thing that God really does require. The question is, where do these criteria come from? And more importantly, why are they important? Let me take my stand as a religious believer quite clearly on a humanist view that what matters is the welfare of humans. Although I'd actually take that more broadly, as I've hinted, the welfare of persons and of sentient beings. But it's about welfare, about the well-being. But that view is not anti-religious. That is capable of being, and I believe it is, and all the religious people I know, or at least the ones I speak to, or who speak to me, a view which says that's what religion is about. It's about how human flourishing can be accomplished, and it's a view which undergirds and underpins a belief in human flourishing. Now, we've heard that, of course, the oppression of human beings and their disparagement and their use as objects and instruments is not confined to the religious. It is found in the irreligious. It's found in any human being who simply is evil. Religion is not a defense against evil in that you can't be a religious person who is evil. You certainly can. In fact, if the churches are meant to be places where sinners go, you are going to find quite a few evil people hanging around, and you're going to think, well, I'm glad they're here because this is the place where we ought to be, but I hope they might be changed a bit by all this. I don't think religious communities are people only for the morally poor, but they are places where morality is underpinned. And let me just spell out a little bit what I mean by this. Suppose that you think that being a human is being the result of a million copying mistakes in the replication of DNA, so that you are simply an accident in the universe. Now you could say, as David Hume said, as Bertrand Russell said, my morality doesn't depend on my view of human beings. I can have a humane morality and wish for human flourishing, even if humans are accidental mistakes. But Bertrand Russell himself said, I have to admit that some of my firmest moral beliefs cannot be justified by my theoretical beliefs. And he found that rather worrying. And this question of what could justify you acting upon a belief in the importance and value and dignity of human life is a very worrying question for someone who thinks, well, human beings are actually accidental mistakes. There is no intrinsic dignity in them. There is nothing in them of objective worth or value. They're just what's been thrown up. You can be good if you like. I'd be pleased if you were. Perhaps it's quite comfortable for me to be good within limits. But why should I go further than that? The question of why, you may hold, is unanswerable. I'd have a great sympathy with that. I mean, supposing you said, look, I'm not religious, I don't know why I should be good, I'd agree with you. I'd say, no, I hope you will be, but I don't know why you should be. And you might say, well, I just have to accept it somehow as just obvious that I ought to be good. But where does that ought fit into the universe? Another philosopher, J.L. Mackie, who wrote a little book called Inventing Right and Wrong, standard book in moral philosophy, said that people naturally believe that morality is objective. That is, we all really think there are obligations. There are things we ought to do. We are challenged. We think, I have to do this, I ought to do this anyway, even if I can't think of any justification. That sense of ought is somehow built into the human character, perhaps genetically programmed. Mackie says that's how it is, but of course this is a delusion. It's actually a delusion. And we could rebel against the tyranny of our selfish genes and against the programs which have been genetically hardwired into us and say, if I could stop being this feeling that I have a moral ought, I could have a much better life, really, and think, no, there's nothing to constrain me, there's really nothing there, there's nowhere in the universe that the ought could fit into. I would find that quite worrying as a non-religious person, and since I've been one, I know that I did find it quite worrying. Because I had the problem of saying, well, I can't find anything that would justify my acting on my moral beliefs. I could justify having moral beliefs, that is, I know that human flourishing is in the abstract a good thing, but who cares about the abstract? I mean, what's it going to matter? There's nothing there which impels me to do this. What difference does God make? And again, I want to interpret God here in a very wide sense. We're talking about a dimension of human experience which is transcendent to humanity and which is felt as a moral impulse or lure or urging, something which, as it were, calls us to something greater than we are and calls us to be self-sacrificing in the name of human welfare and flourishing. You can take that very broadly. You don't even have to call it God, but it's certainly part of what a Jew or a Christian would call God. And one of the most important contributions of Judaism and Christianity is to make this clear, that one of the ways in which humans experience their lives is as confronted with a moral demand to make humanity flourish. And that sense of demand is what doesn't let you remain free to do anything you want, whether it's cannibalism or the other things that Rabbi Boteach is so fond of. So, there is that problem. How does God fit into this? Well, let me just say how a theologian who actually trying to respond to the problems of Leviticus, well, to some extent, and has decided they really belong to a culture far away, and we've got to do something about this, and what you do about it is spelled out pretty clearly in the Bible, as a matter of fact. But what you'd say about this, it would be, first of all, what would you mean if you said that there is a good God? Religious people say there is a good God. What would you mean by that? Well, this is spelled out fairly clearly. You mean a God who is concerned with and who expresses in the divine being beauty, compassion, wisdom, and happiness. These would be fundamental qualities of a God, if there was a God. I mean, let's suppose it's just imagination. You're just thinking, well, what if there was? It would be a being of supreme beauty, compassion, wisdom, and happiness. Because that would be what goodness actually is. Those would be the intrinsic values which are worthwhile for their own sake. So, if there's a God, it's not going to be one of these people who goes around saying, kill all the Amalekites if you can find any left, and gives other absurd commands. It's going to be a being you have to reflect upon. What's the nature of this being? But still, if there is such a